Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Research Innovation's Spinouts Academy event on managing burnout and mental health for founders. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. We're really excited to have you on the call to converse, about this really, really important topic. We have three fantastic speakers with me today to have a really open and reflective conversation about burnout and mental health. And with that, I'm going to actually pass the virtual mic to them for their introductions prior to us hopping into a dynamic discussion and then Q&A section. Tracy, you're off mute, so I'm going to have you go ahead and get started with your intro first.
Well, thanks, Katie. It's really a pleasure to join this panel. I'm very excited. I always love an opportunity to talk about well-being and mental health, especially in the workplace. I'm Tracy Fink. I'm the founder of the Tortoise Institute. We teach mindfulness-based emotional intelligence in the workplace. I call myself a reluctant founder. I wasn't always in the entrepreneur space. However, I'm a Northeastern alum, got my MBA from DeMoore-McKim before it was DeMoore-McKim. And I was in marketing for professional services for most of my career. I don't know, maybe about 10 or so years ago, I experienced some kind of burnout just because I think I was not in alignment for what I was meant to be doing rather than, just doing what I had been doing for 20 plus years. And so I found this certification from Google, secular, science-based in the space of emotional intelligence for organizations. So it was the language, it was the processes, it was the research around it, which brought me to just founding the Tortoise Institute, which is my company. Got the name the Tortoise Institute because like the tortoise, we carry our stuff with us, and I teach people how to work with their stuff. Also, like the tortoise, sometimes we have to, peek our heads out of our shell and step out of our comfort zone, which a lot of this discussion is going to be around that. And also, like the tortoise, this work is slow and it's not easy or quick to change a mindset. So, just because you participated in a 45-minute discussion on, mental well-being, it really takes a lot of practice and support and help and guidance and, beginning again. So I'm just really passionate about this work. And I'm delighted to see so many of you who are interested show up for this.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Monika, I'm going to hand the virtual mic to you next for your introduction.
Sure. So hi, I'm Monika. I'm based in London and come from Poland, so it's very different to most of you, I imagine. I have a company which is called OMA, and we are basically a platform for founders' mental health support. We started last year as a platform for real-time access to therapists, and only this year pivoted everything to support only for founders. And that was because we saw so much demand and so many people coming to me and opening the conversation and asking about therapists or coaches who we can recommend to work with founders specifically. That we saw that the demand on the market is huge. And it's actually a very good momentum because investors want to pay for it for founders. So that's our focus. And I've been with startups for the last 9 years. I worked for 3 very large unicorns with founders of those companies, heading brand departments. So I could see a very different vibe in different companies, how they have been built, the successful ones. I've seen like the ups and downs and basically hiring people, firing people. So I've seen the journey from like many different angles. And I'm very excited to be here. So hope we can have an interesting conversation, and thank you for organizing.
Thanks so much, Monika. And Carlos.
Yeah, thank you, Monika. Thank you, Tracy. Thanks, Katie. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and participating in the conversation here. I'll keep mine relatively brief. My name is Carlos Rodarte. I've been in the healthcare life sciences space for over 20 years. Serial entrepreneur, started about 3 companies now, 2 of them in mental health. One of my current companies, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Veriteos, which we help from a mental health care navigation perspective. So we work in underserved areas and we help people find more culturally relevant mental health care. Personally, I'm an only child to a single mother who immigrated from Mexico, and that really helped shape a lot of the way in which I worked. And sometimes finding my why became quite challenging, and particularly in the startup world, where you have to confront reality day in and day out, and you have to confront your fears and confess your fears. So I've learned a lot in terms of how to manage and protect one's personal energy. And I've developed a strong group of founders and CEOs that have built different types of companies. So happy to kind of dig into some of those learnings. Bigger picture, I'm a huge mental health advocate, and I try to create spaces for people to have discussions that are really forthcoming, and recognizing that for everyone, but men in particular, there's a lot of strength to be found in vulnerability. And there's a large dose of humility that can help, not just be vulnerable with yourself, but also with your team members to build higher performing teams. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion and sharing some of the personal stories that I've had dealing with burnout, those that I've seen from my colleagues in the industry, but also how that kind of bubbles up in terms of how it may apply to some of the companies that you're building here and some of the dynamics that you're confronting. So I'll pass it over to Katie.
Thanks so much, Carlos. Great to have everyone's introductions. We're now going to begin the discussion portion of the panel here. And I just want to encourage everyone that as you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat so that you don't forget them and I can incorporate them into the conversation. We will have an active Q&A section at the end of the discussion, and more than happy to have you ask your question then as well, but don't want you to forget them. So please feel free to engage with us asynchronously as we go. To begin the conversation, thank you, Tracy, for kind of discussing your own personal burnout story, right? And what kind of led you to where it is you are today. Carlos and Monika, I'd love to hear from you two on kind of either a personal burnout story or a burnout story of somebody else that you feel is really relevant, and how that burnout was kind of recognized and addressed. Are there any common unhealthy behaviors that you've experienced personally and or observed in startup founders? And Tracy, I'd love for you to also comment on the back end of that question after we go through kind of our burnout story, so that everyone understands what we mean by burnout as we get started here.
I'm happy to share. I do have a story like this. So when I was working with, that's not the reason why I started the company, but I did experience that when I was working with the company called Oyo, which was a SoftBank portfolio company. I joined them just after they raised 1 billion from SoftBank Series E. I lived between London and India, and for a year I was traveling all the time. It was just before COVID. I did 89 long distance flights in a year. So like a year is 52 weeks, think about it, right? So it was absolutely crazy. And at the end, I ended up in a hospital because it was so much that I started having like fever and basically like almost like passing out. I never knew in which time zone I was. I was either London or Southeast Asia or Japan or US. And I think what is interesting here is like this is what I see from the perspective, but at the moment, it was the adrenaline and like the excitement of building the company and like so many things to do. I was working with the founder of this company. It was 8,000 people company, a lot of responsibility. Nothing was stopping us because we had so much money in the bank to burn and to build and so much fuel. So this drive was just like pushing us all so far. And then I realized only when I like almost like couldn't function anymore that this is not healthy. So I think there's like the learning here is like the balance of how do you really manage this excitement and adrenaline when you have access to it? So it's like not only how you manage your lows, but also how you manage this extreme high, which can drive us, but also like be very, very against us. So it was end of 2019. Of course, then after we had COVID, so I wasn't traveling, had time to recover. But that's my personal experience, something which I always see in founders as a great energy, but it's like also something that can be very destructive.
Thank you for sharing, Monika. I have many stories. I'll pick one. I think, but I'll get a little deeper in terms of where the burnout sort of really came from. And I think this is really something that I try to communicate often, which is a mindset that my self-worth was tied to my productivity. So when my productivity really changes or decreases, that can really affect an individual, as it did with me during the pandemic. So it was really a sense of, why are you building? How am I building? how am I managing those highs and those lows? And, I think that one of the things that I started noticing is just sleep patterns changing, really sort of lacking, animated movement in the world. And I think when I reflect back, that really has shaped a lot of my self-care and sort of the things that I put in place and the routine and the discipline to kind of stick with it. But I think that the big part is, for me, is realizing sort of what season you're in and just really listening to your body and finding that silence and really understanding, where are these pressures coming from? Are they your own pressures? Are they narratives that you've absorbed from what you think startup building should be like? There's a lot of that sort of narrative busting that I think we can do that I wasn't able to process appropriately. And I was really internalizing a lot of that to the point that it was quite crippling. I almost went inpatient a couple of times during the pandemic. But I think, those are the types of signs that I see, in some of the things that I'll share more about in this call and this webinar around kind of tactics for self-care. But I think the one thing that I'll say is that there's really no shame in talking about these things. And often what I do is just, I'm quite open with it as a way to, open the door for this type of conversation. And I think the worst feeling is believing that you're alone in this journey. And oftentimes these types of experiences happen to many people. So I try to create opportunities to sort of let some air into the conversation on this topic.
Thanks so much, Carlos and Monica. Tracy, do you want to hop in with your feelings on kind of the behavior cycles that you've observed?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I just want to talk a little bit, though, just from my research, what burnout can look like or what it is. And so, we've heard the physical exhaustion, we've heard the soundtrack or the inner dialogue that leads us to, some of these conclusions that were not good enough or unworthy. I mean, in my thing, it was, I think my head and my heart were not in alignment. But just knowing that burnout is really like a self-assessment, we really just, many of us know that things are not right. And it could be exhaustion, it could be cynicism, detachment from a job or your personal life. It's a sense of ineffectiveness or decline in performance or these physical symptoms. So just know that it can take on many different, it just takes on many different ways of showing itself. And I also know that there were people in my circle who cared for me and knew that I was just, my mind showed up as this detachment. And I had to believe them because I knew they were supportive of me. They were in my corner. They were not out to get me. It wasn't a competitive. They truly loved me and cared for me. And I had like, no, I'm fine, or I got this myself. And so, I mean, my, the hindsight learning is that there are people who care for us, and it's really important to maybe listen. If you can't listen to your own body, which is probably giving you an incredible amount of information, then maybe you can rely on the wisdom of people in your circle who know you and who care for you. And so maybe, believe what they're saying and then ask for help. Simple, but not easy.
Absolutely well said. Thank you so much for that. I want to hop in a bit to kind of the actionable takeaways. I feel like the stories you shared were extremely professional and felt, there's something that resonates with me, and I'm sure that it does for some of the others on the call, as to what it is you called out specifically that led you to understand that you were feeling that burnout. I'd love to hear now, and Carlos, we'll start with you on tactics and strategies for self-care and compassion, because you brought that up a couple of times, especially around self-care. Would you kick us off?
Yeah, happy to. I think we are so hard on ourselves, and I'll speak from my own experience. There's such high expectations, this desire to want to perform and really sort of go above and beyond. And it's a startup culture mindset. So I think oftentimes, for me, it starts with just having compassion for what I can do and cannot do in the ways that that are healthy for me. But I think from my perspective. One of the things that I focus on in terms of self-care is what are those daily practices that I can use to build up my daily capacity for increasing my understanding. And that understanding can be on a range of emotions. It's people, clients, myself. And practically what that looks for me is, I meditate daily. I have a strong practice there. I do physical activity. I make time to, spend quality time with my friends and family. It's just really building that capacity and reserve for when things come up, because invariably they do. Life comes up, business comes up, startups are quite the journey, right? So for me, finding that sort of breath and that centeredness on a daily basis is really helpful. And what I found is that doing it first thing in the morning is the only time with kids in the house and lots of demands. And, I found that moment, and it's been a part of my practice for years now. And it's been really quite illuminating in terms of helping manage the highs and the lows, and just being a little bit more empathetic and compassionate with myself and others.
Thanks, Carlos. Tracy, I want to come back to you for a moment, because we had a question in the chat come up around early signs of burnout. How do we, and you talked a bit about your research, how do you recognize burnout before it escalates to a point that maybe you are impatient, right? And what are some of the tactics you can enable in your lifestyle or changes to your work life in addition to your personal life to kind of strategize around that? I know you do a lot in self-compassion work, so would love to hear from you on this.
Thanks, and thank you. Thanks for that great question, Sundar. But our bodies give us a lot of very useful information, and so often we're detached from our bodies. We ignore the signs. We attribute. We make up a story around some things that we feel that might something else. We attribute it without. We don't spend the time going deep into what this could possibly mean or what this information is telling us, because we're busy, and we don't, many of us are on autopilot, got to get it done, got to get it done. So that idea of just kind of tuning in or asking for help, which is never easy. And I think Carlos mentioned this vulnerability, as leaders, when we are struggling, it impacts the whole organization or the people around us. And we think we do a great job hiding it or covering it up. And the truth is, we really don't. We just can't. Everything's bubble up, and we're impatient, or we're exhausted, or we make poor decisions because we're influenced by something else. So I think the more we can really you recognize that self-care, first of all, doesn't have to cost anything. It's not like retreats, mani-pedis, or spa days. It is asking for help. It is recognizing that I might need a time out. I might need some meditation, or I might need something. I might need some care. I can't do it on my own. It might mean sharing. We also can't do a lot of these changes without like an accountability partner. So who in your life is someone who you trust, who knows you, who will give you the respect and honesty that you need when you're going through a difficult time. So anytime we want to change a habit, or anytime we need an honest assessment, who's in your kitchen cabinet or your board of directors, that will give you that kind of honest and insightful feedback, and that you'll listen to without the armoring up and, no, I got this. So, it's really acknowledging, what is, rather than what we wish or what if. It's just really being with what is.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Monika, when we were preparing for this call, you talked a bit about the founders that you work with and the fact that if you cannot take care of yourself, right, the company potentially doesn't exist, especially when you're potentially a first-time founder. It is you on the team. There may be others involved, but there may not. Can you talk a bit about founder resilience and your work there?
Sure. So I think this conversation, like about founders taking care of themselves, is important in context of how can they afford mental health support. So it works different in different countries, but very often I heard from founders that, okay, I cannot pay for my own therapy, it's a little bit too expensive, I'm on my survival salary at the early stage and so on. And what we are convincing founders to do is to say, look, this is a valid business expense. It's the same as you do coaching, you can reimburse your therapy, and investors are more and more encouraging founders to do it. And the response which I got a few times, like more than a few, like surprisingly, was, well, if I cannot afford it for my whole team as a company, why would I give myself this perk? And that's where the conversation is like, you and your team in this matter is very different. Because if your team member burns out, it's bad. If you burn out, it's the end of the company, right? You cannot afford to go down. And very often that means that this person is like, the founder is just pushing themselves too hard. But what we are trying to do is to say, like, look, think earlier. Think about your own issues which may appear. Think about, are there things in your past that you need to work on, like with your self-confidence, with your how you build relations with other people, with your self-awareness, so that when you have to stand in front of 100 people and lead them, or like hire or fire or raise money and like do all those things that people will be looking at you and holding you accountable to, that you are very strong and you feel strong. And I think that's why founders' mental health is much more important than providing all of the solutions to the teams. And I think very often, like first-time founders think about this like, oh, it's a luxury, but it's actually not. It's a must. It has to be done so that you are able to lead the company in a long term, because that's what people will be investing in, your ability to be this person like who's leading for another 10, 20 years.
And Monika, can you share a little bit more about the venture capital pledge you've been working with in close collaboration, and what that potentially means for folks on this call who may choose to raise venture capital or dilutive funding in the future?
Yes, so it's an organization called Founders Mental Health Pledge, and it's basically a platform. It's a charity. You can Google it, or I can share the link later. And they have they encourage VCs to put in the term sheet a paragraph that they expect the founder to spend money on their mental health support, however they want. So it's that it's not up to you, like do you want it or not, but it's that you're actually expected to do it. They will not tell you how much you should spend, and that's of course up to you as a CEO of the company or like one of the C-level like co-founders. But they want you to be to take care of yourself basically. And already this is like a very big, like it's like a permission to be like, okay, I'm gonna go to therapy every 2 weeks and just like make sure that I have this safe space to talk to someone in a confidential space, because that's another thing. When you talk to the therapist or to the coach, it can also be a coach. When you talk to them, it's a space which you can talk about everything. You can talk about the fact that you have to let go half of your team tomorrow, things which you are not able to say to anyone else. But in the therapy room, it's a confidential space. So that's why it's so powerful. That's why like Founders Mental Health Pledge is advocating for investors to encourage founders. And there is like a ready-made clause there, which you can share to your investors, or you can see which investors support it. And I think it's not the link that you put. I will just make sure it's the correct one.
Okay, thanks so much, Monika. I tried to find it. Thank you for sharing more. I'd like to talk a little bit about growing your team as a potentially first-time founder or serial entrepreneur, but building a team again for the first time for a net new business. And Carlos, I was hoping maybe you could elaborate on how vulnerability and humility, are really important from your perspective as a founder in building a team and attempting to launch something successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Great question. I think that I'm thinking specifically of one of the companies that I built. It was a very heavily oriented research company that had some real cutting edge technology. So in that context, it was a spin out from a large university here in the Boston area as well, and it was one of those things where it needed to bring together a series of talents, researchers, scientists, technologists, business people, marketing people, and they all really speak different languages, and they have different thresholds for ambiguity and different risk appetite profiles. And it was one of those moments where I remember thinking through, okay, how do we grow this team in a way that we honor those differences, but also get along with them and find some common ground, personality-wise. And I think that often one of the things that I've seen many companies struggle with, and that I've struggled with in the past, is really finding that alignment around people's comfort in ambiguity and understanding a priori almost of what they view success as, particularly if they're coming from a research field where they're maybe not used to being told no because they're a top KOL in the space, but then you're raising funds and you're hearing 100 no's as you're trying to raise capital. So I think those things impact people very differently. So much of the work is just making sure that people are speaking a common language, and as you're building and you're iterating, that everyone's emotional tension is in line. I often talk about the rubber band example, where so much of building a company is stretching that rubber band, and you're always talking about your vision and you're always falling short of your vision. You're building towards it. So that the trick is, how much do you don't snap it, because then you got Theranos. But there's an element of you're going to be pushing the reality to your expectation, to your vision, and that's a healthy tension. But when you start thinking about the individual groups and functional groups and leadership team members, people's ability to stretch is very different. So just understanding what that looks like and how that shows up, I think is really beneficial. So those are some of the things that I look for beyond sort of the table stakes kind of capabilities. Can you do this? Do you have kind of that self-motivation, that inherent aspect of wanting to build for the right reasons? But I find that those personality traits go a long way.
Thanks so much, Carlos. And building on that, Tracy, I'd love to ask you about, some of the strategies and tactics you may suggest for building a very supportive team, right? You've talked a lot about having folks in your kitchen cabinet or on your board that are really supportive and know you. How does that play into building a board for your startup and or hiring net new people, right, who you're going to expect to support you throughout this journey?
I think a lot of this this relationship building, comes from communication. And I think the strongest communication skill in this area is listening. We spend a lot of time wanting to tell everybody how much we know and what our vision is, and but what would it be like if we actively listened to what people are telling us without thinking about how we're going to respond, or shutting them off when we hear something we don't like, or when we get to the point where we want to just jump in. And so active listening is like giving somebody the gift of your complete attention. And we know what that looks like when we don't receive that on the other end. We know when people are distracted or they're on their phone. I'm listening, go ahead, So I think to build these relationships with anybody is asking thoughtful questions, trying to find common ground and values and experiences, and then really listening to what they're telling you and believing them. That's a definition of empathy that I really like, is hearing what people tell you and believe them, because we don't have every experience. We can't possibly always walk in people's shoes, because we just can't. But if somebody who comes in our path and shares something with us, believe them. But I think active listening is just the way that we build relationships with anybody. And also too, like the board of directors, people cycle on and off. So there are people in our lives, or in our work lives or professional lives, who have a place for, we might need them for our early start or early phase, and then we don't need them in that way. So like, just like a, a real formal board, some people have a, emeritus there, they always have a seat, or some people have a seat on the sidelines, or some people are not in the room anymore. And that's also very healthy, I think, to recognize when, some relationships have run their course, or that, we don't need that particular expertise anymore. And, we can let people go with love. And I don't mean love, like love, like respect and trust. That's what I mean by that. And I think that those are ways that we can really start to build, create, and sustain some meaningful relationships with people in our work and in our life.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Monika, I'd love to talk a bit about failure now, because I think some of what potentially impedes, the active listening ability as you're attempting to set up for success is this fear of failure, and that there is so much riding on you as the founder. So can you share your insights on the fear of failure as it relates to success in founders?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because failure is part of the journey, right? So when you decide to build a company and you decide to go all in to raise money, then raise another round of funding, and just be really on this specific, like very specific journey, because there are many other ways of building companies, right? Not only the VC journey, let's say, but if you choose this one, it's unavoidable. You'll be failing like over and over again. And some of those will be very painful. Some of those will be very personal. Sometimes you'll be failing in like other areas of your life because you will be expected to perform in this one area. And it's all about choices. And I think when the person who builds the company, like if you guys take those decisions, you are almost signing yourself up for failure at some point. So being afraid of it is almost as if you were driving a car with like a brake, and it's like, it just doesn't work. And you will always be like trying to hold yourself, like keep yourself in a safe space, but you can't, because you cannot build a company like this. You have to go all in. And there's another thing which is quite interesting in what I heard talking to therapists who work with entrepreneurs, because that's the group of people who work in our platform. Among founders, very often you see fear of success. So what is holding founders back is very often this thing of, if I am extremely successful, and we talk about like the person who is standing there, like talking about how they built this $1 billion company, I'm gonna subconsciously, I know I'm not gonna fit in where I came from, right? Like mentally, because maybe my friends are in a completely different mental state than where I will be. Some people will say like, you changed, right? Some people will suddenly, I'm gonna start losing my safe space, because maybe it's my family who is not used to this level of success, which I am capable of building if I build a huge and very successful company. So very often those things, they're deep in our subconscious. And that's also something which is worth to think of, at least. And then when you start to see some signals of it, like reconcile with either therapist or coach. So I think it's always a mix of fear of failure, fear of success. And whatever it is, you will still you will not get rid of it, right? Like it's just something which is gonna be there. Like if it's one, you get over one, the next one will happen. You'll be going to a market which you don't know. You'll be building a product which you have no idea about. You will hire someone who will be a completely like huge mistake, and this person will start opening legal cases against you. Like those kind of things will be happening. And I've seen like many of such things among founders. And the thing is, like, if you're afraid of that, you're just not gonna build it, right? So it's about like finding the right, like being like really brave and finding the right balance in it, I think.
Thanks so much, Monika. I want to close out the discussion portion of our conversation here with a couple of questions. And Monika, I have one targeted for you, and Tracy and Carlos, I'm going to share what I'm going to ask with you next, just so that you're prepared to kind of close out the conversation here. Monika, specifically, I'd love for you to talk more about kind of discovering and owning power, right? You talked a little bit right now about fear of success and being brave enough, right, to kind of move on that. And so would love to hear your thoughts on again, discovering and owning power. And Tracy and Carlos, for you two, I would like us to close out the conversation with what it means to decide about your capacity and really be able to balance personal and professional decisions so that you can bring your 100%. right? And your 100% may look different than somebody else on the teams, 100%, but that doesn't mean that it's not good enough. And how do we become okay with that phenomenon and what that looks like? So that'll be what I pass the virtual mic to you two for to close out the conversation. But I want to start with you, Monika, and kind of this idea of discovering and owning power.
Yeah, I think it's very closely connected to the failure, like fears and success conversation, right? Like, because it's again, like, can you project yourself as a person who is very powerful, running the company of 5,000 people, right? And powerful, I don't mean like at the, like maybe not that, like at the global scale, but in this particular impact that this company will have. Maybe we'll do some extremely important research. Maybe we'll create some technology which is changing the world. And being able to own it and say like, okay, I actually have a lot of power and things that I say and do are going to have an impact on millions of lives. Seeing yourself in this position can be quite intimidating. And sometimes what I hear from founders is that they're almost like, they don't think they're supposed to even think of themselves like this, right? It's like, maybe I don't deserve it. So for example, I come from Poland, and the Polish culture is very like, it teaches you to be very shy, altruistic, and like you need to give back rather than build something and be the person who stands then and leads others. We are not taught this in our culture. And I think American culture is probably much better with this. Like you guys are, at least my experience from American culture is like you are better in like standing there and saying like, I know how to do it, which is great. But in the same time, being able to actually project yourself in those like 5 years as an extremely successful entrepreneur and CEO is a very good exercise to actually being able like to own power, at least mentally. And again, like if it isn't there, it's like, hold on a second, why isn't it there? Do I think I don't deserve it? Do I think I don't have enough skills? Is there an imposter syndrome? Or maybe it's just like my own idea, which is not a reality, right? And I think like all those things are very interesting to one think of, to reconcile with yourself and build a little bit of self-awareness around it, and then find the right person who can be like a help in it, right? Therapist. Again, I always keep coming back to therapist because I think it's an important thing for everyone, but to go through therapy at some point of their lives. But maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a life partner, and have those conversations, because the earlier you have those conversations, the easier the journey is later. It's like the journey of like self-awareness and self-discovery. That's from what I've seen among founders.
Thanks so much, Monika. Tracy, I'll hand this virtual mic over to you next. Talking about self-awareness, right? And kind of understanding what you can bring and what that's going to look like and why that's okay. Would love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate what you said, Monika, about how culturally, how we show up comes from how we're raised or what the expectations are or what we've seen, because there's a lot of things that have not been role modeled for us in a healthy way. I think, as Americans, it isn't always so great to be like, oh, I got this, because that, that vulnerability that Carlos mentioned is just such an important piece that's missing. Because, I mean, I know I have not seen that much in my work experience, especially working, in male-dominated fields or, very high pressure, industries or organizations. It actually, it's the thing that saves us, is this vulnerability. It's not like, I'm weak. It actually comes from a place of strength. Like, I've done everything I can, and now I need help, or I need more guidance, or I'm sharing with you my challenges, and then invariably people will share with you their challenges, but we never want to go first. We never want to be the first one to be the, the vulnerable one. But I also think, Katie, you mentioned something about showing up and, giving 100%. And, I know from experience, and also from this book, The Four Agreements, I don't know who's read that, but our best looks different at different days, depending on what we're going through. So sometimes we're all in, and we're totally resourced, and we've had enough sleep, and we've eaten well, and we are supported, and we have the founders, the investors support behind, and we have a great team, and we are all in. other days we don't feel that, our kid is sick, or, we have an illness, or whatever, a million different things that happen. So just knowing that our best can vary, and this element of self-compassion, again, not from a place of weakness, but rather from a place of resiliency, meaning like, okay, this is happening. This is how it is. And I'm likely not the only one who's experienced it this way. And what can I offer myself in this moment? Not like, you idiot, you're a loser, you don't got this, but more along the lines of, it's okay, this is hard. Where can we help? How can you get help? What can you learn from this? What do you need to move forward? So it's just that way of talking to ourselves in a way that brings us up rather than beats us down. And I think it was Monika who said, we beat ourselves up all the time. That doesn't help. It might give you the initial push to keep, but in the end, it's not sustainable. So
Thanks so much,
I'll leave it
Tracy.
with that.
Awesome. And Carlos, we'll have you close out the conversation, and then we have a discussion happening in the chat. So we're going to bring that question into the conversation to begin our Q&A section.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. I think this notion of balancing personal and professional, like that bothers me so much, because for so much of my career, those were either ors, and there was such a zero sum, mindset of like, I'm either working or it's like my personal time. And like, even with my kid, it's like time with my kids is not my time, but when you start realizing that it's all your time, and these are not, zero sum, they're not slices, they're layers of experience. And the personal is your spirituality, it's your friendship, it's your hobbies, your work has many identities. There's so many identities wrapped around all of this, that I think sort of this professional or personal is often, for me at least, a tough thing to reconcile. So what I try to look at is, in order for me to be my best self, whatever that means on whatever day, I know that I need a certain balance at the whole self level. And for me, that means spirituality, that means physical activity, that means sweating, that means laughing, that means crying, that means all of those things, to really sort of be more in flow with the work. And it goes well beyond this, personal versus professional mindset. And I think building companies at the early stages, when you have such few resources, you have to make these trade-offs, and they are in fact zero sum at times. It's recognizing sort of the practicality of the decisions that need to be made, but also realizing a certain amount of detachment, or letting go from yourself and the business and how you're functioning, letting go a little bit of the outcome and focusing in on the process, because there's so much ambiguity. There's so much expectation that you're only successful if you raise, or you're only successful if you do this, if you do that. And so much of it is outside of yourself. And one of the things that I try to do, and I'll bring this back, is as we talk about burnout, as we talk about mental health, I think it's incredibly important to remind ourselves and our teams of the successes that we have when building. And we talk about the mismatch between expectation and reality. Those mismatches can also be very positive ones. Like, I just had a client the other day saying, wow, what you did, we had never seen our data in this way in 3 years, of kind of me being here, and now we can provide better patient care. And that was completely unexpected and positive, and that's why we're building, to sort of make things better, and just reminding ourselves that the burnout exists in context, and keeping that bigger picture in mind. So that's a little bit of sort of how I approach that topic. But thank you for the question, Katie.
Well said. Yeah, thank you so much, Carlos, for making the distinction too between work-life balance being something that's often stated, but really shouldn't be necessarily the norm. It's not a balance; it's your life, regardless, right? It's all of it. All of it equals your life at the end of the day that you then have to live. So we have a question that kind of builds on the conversation that we started as we ended the dialogue portion of this discussion, which is, how do you integrate right, into conversations with team members that exist, how you're going to go about, right, making decisions about your life in whole as it's going to relate to the startup company. So specifically, the question was, how do you handle the intermixed personal and professional elements when having a tough discussion with your team, right? Attempting to maybe make an important decision and needing to consider all of these elements that we just discussed at the closing of our discussion panel. I don't know who might want to hop in first, but if anybody wants to, please feel free.
I am happy to answer. This is an area where I've done it a lot. I've done it not so well, and in other cases, it's worked out much better. I think, if I look at my current company and my co-founder, we just had really upfront discussions of what does our finances look like, what's our personal financial runway, what are the types of priorities that we have, given different ages or different family structures at home. I think it's really important to have context in terms of how people are building and how they're managing their lives, particularly at that founder level, initial founding team, first set of executives, because I am always amazed at how little we actually know about what people are going through. And if you have this big circle and then you have a dot, that dot is what you know about someone else's life at the end of the day. And sort of just being humble and recognizing that, there's going to be things that are impacting people, but for the things that, that are finance oriented, family structure, et cetera, it's just really nice to have those upfront discussions. And then that creates compassion along the way.
Tracy or Monika, yeah, go ahead.
No, I love that. And, we make so many assumptions about people, like, somebody will eye roll us or, not be fully present in a meeting or in a conversation. And, we don't know. And so I think leadership also looks like asking that, tough question, like, I notice you, were venting, or I notice you were reacting very strongly in a meeting, and it's not like you. Is everything okay? And many of us don't ask those questions because we're very busy, and we think it's going to take up too much time to try to navigate this, or we think we're not going to be able to handle what they're going to tell us. But actually, most of the time, I'm not saying all the time, but a lot of the time, it's just like, my kid is sick, or I got a flat tire on my way to work, or, I'm dealing with aging parents, or something personal. But we really do often don't share that stuff for fear of oversharing, or for fear of looking weak, or for fear, but that is the meat, and that is what stops people from, giving their full selves, or, 100% to the work. And, if we knew what people were going through, we could work with it. We could help them. We could give them extra resources, or affinity groups, or, and something, or even an ear, just to be heard, to be felt like they're cared for. And that also goes a long way in effectiveness.
Thank you. We have another question here in the chat that I want to be sure we address because I think it's important, and it's exemplary of feeling burnout, and how do we now navigate away from it. So the question is, how can you dig yourself out when you've missed the mark and you find yourself burned out, especially because this often happens when things are busy and you're involved in particularly important work, and it's difficult to take time, that's in quotes, right, to take time to think about yourself and kind of dig out of this burnout space.
I think I know, like, about the burnout. I think there's something very interesting in self-awareness, and you guys may have some other perspective from your experience, but in my opinion, my experience is spending time when you can about really getting to know yourself and your boundaries is very important, because that will be important in the burnout. Because the moment you realize, like, oops, like I'm too far, I'm already in this like moment when I'm losing control, I'm super anxious and so on. If you have the tools, and those can be the tools of having a therapist who you can go to, because maybe you haven't seen them for a year, but this person is there. It can be the meditation technique that you learned a year before, but you can always get back to. It can be the gym, it can be anything, spending time with your kid, whatever it is. But if you know what is this thing that will be your reset, you know that, okay, when you recognize that you are in this moment, you pull the plug for an hour and you just literally like write off an hour, or like do it for a day if you can, but pull the plug, like literally switch off your phone and spend time on really like a reset, because that will be worth everything. That's from my experience and what I've seen among people who we work with is but you really need to know how to spend this hour or how to spend this day, right? So it is like being prepared and aware. It's important. But I want to say something about this previous question about like letting other people talk about their issues, vulnerabilities. I think that's where the boundaries are very important as well. Because if you imagine having 100 people team and absorbing everyone's trouble, and if you are a sensitive person, which many of us are, it can be really draining. So you need to know what are the boundaries and how you deal with those things. So if you have a difficult time, it's Christmas, or like kids are sick, like this is a school time and many people have their like situations at home, and it's all on you to help those people find resources, it's going to be very difficult. So you need to know when to say no and say, look, I understand this is the situation, but my job is ultimately making sure that the company is up and running. So if like 80% of my staff is in this situation, how do I deal with this? So it's like having processes in place and resources in place where you can actually manage this rather than absorbing everything on yourself, because that's a mistake which I made like in the past, where I allowed a lot of people like really speak about their issues, and rather than thinking about, okay, we have to perform as the company, we ended up being almost like this kind of like helping each other, kind of like incubator. And like for a few weeks I was like, hold on a second, this is not working. We are in a safe space, but this is not a therapy room. We have to deliver. It's a company. So like those kind of things are important as well.
Well said. Thank you, Monika. Tracy and Carlos, do you want to add anything to kind of digging yourself out of the burned out hole?
Well, how I looked at it, I mean, first of all, I really appreciate that follow-up, Monika, about asking, is everything okay? And then recognizing that you can't fix, as a leader, you can't fix everybody. So having that resource is so important. But, to avoid some of the burnout, we say small moments many times. So it is about maybe tuning out or tuning off or shutting down for 2 minutes. You'd be very surprised if you, turned your desk around and turned your phone off and just maybe focused on your breath or looked at something joyful for literally 2 minutes, and you could see how restorative that could be. So, it's not always big steps. It's not always major things that you need to do. But if you do small things consistently for this, resilience or for self-care, I think you'd be surprised how far that could go.
This is a great question. I think I've had a lot of mantras over the years at stages where I felt this, ranging from, this too shall pass to this also belongs, to I am enough, I've done plenty, and just really giving myself permission to shut off and, come a certain time and just saying, there's a lot going on, and I need to sort of do a healthy separation on a daily basis with work, and being okay with that and accepting that. And that is a really tough thing to do, and it comes with practice. And I think that's where talking to other people really makes a lot of sense. Other founders, people that have been through it, and having that support system around you to sort of really help reflect back the situation that you find yourself in. But also just take the time and understand your own fortitude and your own risk tolerance, because what I often see is that maybe you are a startup founder, but just maybe not with the certain expectations that VC money brings with it. Maybe your type of startup or business, has a different journey. And at the end of the day, as founders and as builders, we have the agency to build however we want to build. And it's a daily reminder of that and no one else can tell you how to do it. And I think good programs like Katie and Sal and kind of what you're doing here is providing sort of that lens into here are the ways of building and how that can be matched up to people's fortitude, personalities, et cetera. So I think, anyways, those are some of the things some of the mantras that I've had and some additional perspective.
Thank you so much. I think our most major lessons learned here as part of the Q&A session were set boundaries and do take time. I know that taking time feels like a lot when you feel like it's extremely limited, but you know, that 1 to 2 minutes, that 1 hour to 1 day, as described, you know, by Tracy and Monika, is really important and can make a most major difference. With that, we have 60 seconds left of our panel. So I want to thank our panelists so much for this really kind of open dialogue that we had today. And I want to thank everybody for their questions in the chat. I even saw a bit of a dialogue happening between some of our founders in the chat, which is what we hope to enable through these spin-out community events. So yes, virtual claps for everyone who participated today, both who spoke, in addition to both who participated. Really appreciate all of you and your time. Tracy, Carlos, Monika, fabulous discussion. This is recorded. It will be posted on our CRI YouTube channel so that if any of you want to come back to this conversation just to reflect, or if you need that reminder as to how you might want to think about some of this, we really hope that, you know, that link helps you in the future. So thanks again for everyone who joined today, and hope to see you again soon.